Hello, good morning. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Our headlines here this morning. A woman who had a sexual relationship with Russell Brand has told Sky News he made her feel intimidated and vulnerable a week after allegations of sexual assault and rape emerged. The comedian says that all of his relationships were consensual. Ukraine has attacked a Russian naval base in Crimea as part of its counter-offensive. Ukraine's military says it used a cruise missile supplied by the UK and France. Nearly a third of people admitted to hospital with COVID had abnormalities in multiple organs 5 months on, according to a new study. MPs have called on the government to extend the warm home discount to support households struggling to pay their energy bills before winter. A growing number of women are calling on the NHS to improve treatment options for heavy periods, as research shows 1 in 5 endometrial ablation procedures fail. Rishi Sunak's popularity is at its lowest point since he became Prime Minister. The YouGov poll shows 68% of people now have an unfavourable view of the Prime Minister. Well, let's take a look now at some of the stories making this morning's front pages. And The Times says that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has been told by Boris Johnson and David Cameron to drop plans to scale back HS2. According to The Express, a group of right-wing MPs has told Rishi Sunak that Conservatives can only win the next election if they return to the party's traditional values. The Daily Telegraph reports on a so-called woke takeover of Whitehall. That's from a letter sent to the Cabinet Secretary. The Financial Times hears the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is planning a revamp of individual savings accounts, or ISAs. The next generation may be banned from smoking. That's according to The Guardian. The Eye reports that the UK and Russian officials have been holding secret talks during Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Elsewhere, the Daily Mail reports on a 19-year-old woman who's had her life support machine switched off after a legal battle with the NHS. Sudiksha Thirumalai can finally be named after the judge lifted a legal order. A royal story makes the front of The Sun, which says Prince Harry has snubbed the King's offer for him to stay at Balmoral as the family marks the Queen's death anniversary. The Star, on the other hand, criticised the King for taking a private jet home from France shortly after giving a speech on what he called the existential threat of global warming. So much to get our teeth into then. Here with me to do just that are journalist and authors Janelle Aldred and Nikki Hodgson. Very good morning to both of you. Nice to see you. So we've got a few stabs at this, haven't we? Coming back a couple of times, but let's get cracking on some of those front pages. And Janelle, you want to pick up on the Times front page story, and this is some reaction to the news, the reports that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor were considering scaling back HS2, and it's had a bit of a backlash from what you would normally think of supporters of the government.
Well, yes, and I mean, how credible David Cameron and Boris Johnson are right now for advice, I don't know if I'd be taking it from them. However, I do think that this is an ongoing story, HS2. I feel like when I was a baby journalist first starting out, and this was well over a decade ago, we were talking about HS2 then, and we're still talking about now, and the only thing that's not here is HS2. I think really the issue with this story and the issue with HS2 is I don't think they should stop midway. Like we've seen, I travelled on the Eurostar, what would have been some of the stops, and when it doesn't happen, it causes a lot of ripple effects. So they want to basically, or the plan, or it's said, they want to stop the line from Birmingham to Manchester. Now, the biggest difference in time difference would be from Manchester to London. So if that doesn't exist, it kind of makes you ask, what is the point of HS2? Because it only shaves off 10 minutes of time. But for that, the £55 billion budget has ballooned to 71 at the last time of acting. So you have to kind of think maybe what the issue is the budget, and it's actually about controlling the budget rather than saying we're going to stop halfway through and actually not finish the job, because it seems to me like there's a money issue rather than an infrastructure issue.
Yeah, questions being asked about why that cost has ballooned. But so what's happening here is these former Prime Ministers are saying you've got to go ahead with it. It was part of the levelling up promises. But at the same time, on the other hand, you've got the Chancellor doing the sum saying there really isn't very much money at the moment. There's a cost of living crisis. Should we be spending more billions?
I mean, the problem is, I'm from Yorkshire. We were promised this so long ago. And it really is a kind of shame for the North, you know. There is a huge North-South disparity in terms of economic opportunity, and it just won't be bridged until we have these kinds of things coming. It feels like a slap in the face if you're Northern, to be honest.
Right, so, and that's obviously part of the argument, so we'll see whether or not where this ends up landing. But Nikki, take us on to the front of the Express, and this is again Rishi Sunak getting more advice from Tories, but these are different Tories within his party. What are they calling for?
Well, so, I mean, he doesn't actually make it explicit who it is. It just says some right-wing MPs. It doesn't say they're backbenchers or wherever. Maybe it does say further in the paper, but just on the front, it's saying he's been told, Rishi Sunak, that only true Tory values can save the party's soul. So for a long time, there's been this kind of, schism in the Conservative Party from people that want to kind of be more progressive, more modern, something that maybe David Cameron started. And, there's this argument that the reason everyone's arguing so much is because the people that were first in the party and wanted things like lower taxes, cared deeply about immigration, maybe wanted to push so-called family values, have been ignored. And that Rishi Sunak needs to go back to those values if he's to win, in particular votes from the red wall. Now, I don't think this is the answer at all, actually, for the Tories. I think it's very cynical. I think, what we saw this week about the climate protocols, about them being pushed back, is just so cynical. It's not thinking about the long-term development of people, long-term investment in our country. And I think he's in danger of going after this to save the votes of the party members and not to do what the people want to do.
Well, yes, and Rishi Sunak says it is what the people want. They're worried about the costs imposed on them personally of some of these measures. That's why he says he's going ahead and doing it. What do you think, Janelle? We're going to hear more and more of this, aren't we, in the run-up to an election? Different parts of the party jostling to have influence.
It's going to be a long year, but I think for a long time, I don't think they've quite known who they are as they've kind of drifted. As you say, David Cameron was kind of on a Tony Blair-esque kind of line in terms of there was a lot of blurring, and I think the issue now is that Keir Starmer's moving a little bit further to the right, so there's a lot of blurring. So it is about where do they want to position themselves? Are they going to stay where they are and potentially risk a lot of bleed and overlap in terms of policy and the things that they're saying, or do they go further backwards, what I would maybe call backwards, or do they want to go further right and be really clear that they are a very, very different party to what Labour are? Because I think that's a bit of the issue.
Setting out distinctions is part of it, isn't it? And perhaps Rishi Sunak feels that that's a dividing line as far as the net zero protocols are concerned.
Absolutely. And in some ways, because Keir Starmer has moved to the middle, he's pushing Rishi Sunak further back. You could argue that he hasn't got a choice to differentiate the party from the Labour at the minute.
OK, let's move on, because there's lots of different stories around today, and some of them are intriguing, not least on the front of The Guardian. It is actually picked up on some of the other papers as well. And this, well, they're claiming it's an exclusive. I've definitely seen it in other papers. They are suggesting that Rishi Sunak is considering, so whether or not this will ever be policy, I don't know, but he's definitely talking about the prospect of introducing tougher anti-smoking laws for young people. So what exactly is the proposal he's looking at?
And some of the toughest, apparently, in the world, even tougher than New Zealand, who have reduced the tobacco, in all of these products. So what it would mean is if you're born after 2009, you would never be able to buy a cigarette ever. I don't know if this is how you actually create change in terms of something like smoking. I guess, as I said, it's going to be a long year. And so people are trying to see what is their appetite for change. Labour have suggested something like this before to say, would there be appetite for change, and kind of testing the waters. To me, I think this is a bit of a, pardon the pun, smoke and mirror story. I don't think they're going to get a ban in for everyone born after 2009 to buy cigarettes. But basically, I see the health benefits. I'm not a smoker myself, and I kind of understand after you brought the smoking ban in. But I think to say we're going to ban people from buying cigarettes full stop, I don't think that's ever going to be passed, and I don't think it will ever be a thing. And I think it's another policy that's being spouted with no real way of making it happen, or I think public appetite for it.
Because the idea is that you ban it for a certain age group, and then you shift that ban so that that generation actually never gets to legally buy cigarettes. That's the idea, isn't it?
But the problem is we have a huge amount of contraband cigarettes, we have contraband vapes. I think this will make the problem with smoking much worse. I mean, much harder. We already have cigarettes and vapes coming into this country that don't contain the ingredients that they say they do, other things that are really detrimental to health. So I actually think if you lose control of the sales of cigarettes, you will lose control of, the health effects of smoking on people.
And with so much tax coming in from cigarettes, are they really going to ban it? It's quite an income for the government. So I can't see them, doing
Although
that.
the money they'd save on the NHS, they might argue, the health.
Six
the health
of one,
benefits.
half a dozen of the other, but they like tax, so I'm not sure they're going to do that.
Let's move on to the Daily Telegraph next. Their main story is Whitehall taken over by woke zealots. So what's this about, Janelle?
So this is talking about government policy maybe being improperly influenced by essentially think tanks who are running workshops, running training. I mean, for one thing, I think the word woke is much overused and little understood. And so I think that is the first issue in kind of using the word woke. It's a word that divides because I think people have different opinions of what it means to be woke. But equally, I think it just sounds like, the Cabinet Office is meant to be the impartial, the civil service, the impartial thing that is running the country behind the scenes, the infrastructure. So it shouldn't be taken over by any faction, in my personal opinion. And I think this is about actually how do they have better conversations within their departments so that no one feels that they are being impeded for having an opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I find this really interesting because is it because actually there's younger people working in the civil service, and with them they have brought opinions that some of the older staff consider woke, and some of the ministers consider woke. Jacob Rees-Mogg is pretty right-wing. He has some very strong social opinions as well as economic ones. I can't imagine many 20-year-olds holding the opinions that he does. And so I think that actually it's not, this obsession with getting rid of woke. Actually, maybe just society's moved on, and many people just have, different social inclusion values to you, and actually maybe that's not a bad thing.
So more views being aired generally a good thing. Yeah, discuss. Anyway, we will see you both in another hour to talk through more papers. But for the moment, thanks both very much indeed.
Thanks.